The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete expanse of Fort Harrison as Staff Sergeant Maya Chin stepped out of her barracks, adjusting the collar of her standard-issue uniform. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another soldier beginning another routine day at one of the military's most secure facilities. Her black hair was pulled back in regulation style, her boots polished to mirror brightness, and every crease in her uniform pressed to perfection. Nothing about her outward appearance suggested that she carried within her the weight of secrets that could reshape everything the people around her believed about their mission. Maya had been stationed at Fort Harrison for 6 months now, assigned to the communications division where she handled encrypted messages and maintained secure networks. Her colleagues knew her as competent, reliable, and somewhat reserved. She completed her duties with precision, participated in required training exercises with dedication, and spent her off hours reading technical manuals or working out in the base gym. To most observers, she seemed like the model soldier, perhaps a bit quiet but certainly committed to her service. What none of them knew was that Maya's past extended far beyond what was listed in her official military records. The careful background checks, the security clearances, the interviews with references had all painted the picture of a young woman from a military family who had chosen to follow in her father's footsteps. The records showed her graduating from communications school with honors, excelling in technical training, and receiving commendations for her attention to detail. All of this was true, but it represented only a small fraction of who Maya really was. The truth lay hidden beneath the long sleeves of her uniform, etched in intricate detail across her left shoulder blade. The tattoo appeared to be a beautiful piece of artistic work, incorporating traditional designs that might be mistaken for purely decorative elements by a casual observer. But every line, every symbol, every carefully placed mark told a story that reached back through generations of her family, connecting her to a world that existed in parallel to the military environment where she now served. As Maya made her way to the communications center that morning, she passed groups of soldiers engaged in their morning routines. Some were heading to the mess hall for breakfast, others toward the training facilities, and a few toward the administrative buildings where the day's paperwork awaited. The base hummed with the familiar energy of military life, everyone moving with purpose and following the established patterns that kept the complex operation running smoothly. Captain Rodriguez was already at his desk when Maya arrived at the communications center, reviewing overnight reports and preparing briefings for the day's activities. He looked up as she entered, offering the brief nod that served as their usual morning greeting. Rodriguez had been Maya's supervising officer since her arrival, and while he maintained the professional distance appropriate to their ranks, he had developed a respect for her technical skills and reliability. "Morning, Chun," he said, returning his attention to the documents spread across his desk. "We've got a busy day ahead. Intelligence is expecting several priority transmissions, and there's been some unusual activity on the monitoring networks overnight." Maya settled at her workstation, powering up the array of equipment that connected her to communication networks spanning the globe. As her screens came to life, displaying the complex interfaces she used to manage encrypted communications, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with handling information vital to national security. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, checking system status and reviewing overnight logs. The unusual activity Captain Rodriguez had mentioned quickly became apparent as Maya reviewed the monitoring data. There had been an increase in encrypted traffic from several regions of interest, with patterns that suggested coordinated communications between groups that normally operated independently. The technical details meant little to most people on the base, but Maya's trained eye recognized signatures that indicated something significant was developing. As she worked through the morning's tasks, Maya found herself thinking about the delicate balance she maintained between her official duties and the deeper knowledge that informed her understanding of world events. The tattoo hidden beneath her uniform was more than personal decoration. It was a symbol of training and education that had begun in childhood, preparing her for a role that extended far beyond anything described in military manuals. Her family's traditions stretched back centuries, involving the careful study of languages, cultures, and historical patterns that most people never encountered. What appeared to be artistic designs on her skin actually represented a form of knowledge preservation, with each symbol encoding information that had been passed down through generations of her ancestors. The tattoo served as both a reminder of her heritage and a practical tool, containing reference information that enhanced her ability to understand and interpret the complex communications she handled in her official capacity. The morning progressed with the steady rhythm of routine military operations. Maya processed routine communications, updated system logs, and participated in a briefing session where intelligence analysts discussed current global situations. She listened carefully to their assessments, occasionally offering technical insights about communication patterns, while keeping her deeper understanding of the underlying cultural and historical context to herself. During the lunch break, Maya found herself in conversation with several colleagues in the mess hall. Sergeant Williams, who worked in the intelligence analysis section, was discussing the unusual patterns they had been tracking in overseas communications. His analysis was thorough and professionally competent, but Maya could hear the gaps in his understanding, the cultural nuances, and historical references that he was missing because his training had focused on technical rather than cultural interpretation. There's definitely something coordinated happening, Williams was saying as he reviewed notes on his tablet. The timing of these communications suggests careful planning, but we're having trouble understanding the significance of some of the references they're using. It's like they're speaking in code, but not a technical code we can crack with normal methods. Maya nodded thoughtfully, recognizing patterns in Williams's description that aligned with information encoded in her tattoo. The symbols on her skin included references to historical events and cultural practices that would provide crucial context for understanding the communications he was analyzing. But sharing this knowledge would require revealing the depth of her background, something she was not prepared to do without careful consideration of the consequences. After lunch, Maya returned to her workstation to find that the afternoon's intelligence reports included more detailed analysis of the morning's unusual communications. As she read through the technical assessments, she began to see a clearer picture of what was developing. The communications patterns suggested coordination between groups that had historically operated independently, with references to events and cultural symbols that indicated a significant operation was being planned. The challenge Maya faced was how to contribute her unique knowledge without revealing its source. Her official training qualified her to handle the technical aspects of communication monitoring, but the cultural and historical insights that would unlock the true meaning of what they were observing came from sources that existed outside normal military channels. The information encoded in her tattoo represented generations of accumulated knowledge about the regions and cultures they were monitoring, knowledge that could prove crucial to understanding the developing situation. As the afternoon wore on, Maya found herself carefully crafting suggestions and observations that would guide her colleagues toward the insights she possessed without explicitly revealing their source. She offered technical recommendations that would capture additional data from specific communication channels, suggested analytical approaches that would highlight cultural context, and provided historical background that would help analysts understand the significance of certain references appearing in intercepted messages. Captain Rodriguez noticed her increased engagement with the intelligence analysis process and approached her workstation in mid-afternoon. "You've been particularly insightful today, Chun," he observed, reviewing the suggestions she had submitted through official channels. "These recommendations show a deeper understanding of the cultural context than we typically see from communication specialists. Where did you develop this background?" The question hung in the air as Maya considered how to respond. She had known this moment would eventually come, when her contributions would reveal knowledge that extended beyond her official training. The information she possessed could prove crucial to understanding and potentially preventing whatever operation was being coordinated through the communications they were monitoring. But sharing it would mean revealing aspects of her background that she had kept carefully hidden since beginning her military service. "I've always been interested in the historical and cultural aspects of the regions we monitor," she replied carefully. "I spend a lot of my off-duty time studying languages and cultural practices that relate to our work here." It was a truthful answer as far as it went, but it represented only the surface of a much deeper reality. The knowledge that informed her insights had been accumulated over generations of her family's involvement in understanding and interpreting global events. The symbols tattooed on her skin represented not just personal study, but a systematic preservation of information that had been carefully maintained and passed down through centuries of her ancestors' dedication to understanding the complex cultural forces that shaped world events. As the day continued, the communications monitoring revealed increasingly clear evidence that something significant was being planned. The patterns Maya had identified proved accurate, and her suggestions led to the collection of additional intelligence that confirmed the scope of the coordinated activity. By late afternoon, it had become clear that multiple groups were working together on an operation that could have serious implications for regional stability. The revelation prompted an emergency briefing session where senior officers reviewed the accumulated intelligence and developed response strategies. Maya was included in the briefing due to her contributions to the analysis, and she found herself in a room with colonels and intelligence specialists who were grappling with the cultural and historical dimensions of the threat they were facing. As she listened to their discussions, Maya realized that the knowledge encoded in her tattoo could provide crucial insights that would help them understand not just what was being planned, but why it was happening and how it might be prevented. The symbols on her skin included information about historical grievances, cultural practices, and traditional patterns of organization that would explain the motivations behind the coordinated activity they were observing. The briefing concluded with assignments for continued monitoring and analysis, but Maya could see that the senior officers remained frustrated by gaps in their understanding of the cultural context surrounding the intelligence they had gathered. As the meeting ended and personnel began filing out of the briefing room, she made a decision that would change everything about her role at Fort Harrison. Captain Rodriguez was gathering his materials when Maya approached him. "Sir, I may have additional information that could help with the analysis we discussed today." He looked up with interest, recognizing the serious tone in her voice. "What kind of information, Sergeant?" "It's complicated to explain," Maya replied, glancing around the nearly empty briefing room. "But I have access to historical and cultural knowledge that could provide important context for understanding what we're seeing in these communications." Rodriguez studied her face, sensing that there was more to her statement than the words revealed. "This is knowledge beyond what's covered in your official training?" Maya nodded, feeling the weight of the decision she was making. "Yes, sir. It's knowledge that's been in my family for generations. Knowledge that I think could be crucial to understanding and responding to what's developing." The captain was quiet for a moment, considering the implications of what she was telling him. "Sergeant, are you saying you have access to intelligence sources that aren't reflected in your security clearance documentation?" "Not intelligence sources in the traditional sense," Maya replied carefully. "More like cultural and historical knowledge that's been preserved through traditional means. Knowledge that could help interpret the cultural references and historical contexts that are appearing in the communications we're monitoring." As she spoke, Maya could feel the tattoo on her shoulder blade, hidden beneath her uniform, but carrying the weight of centuries of accumulated knowledge. The moment had come when she would need to reveal not just what she knew, but how she knew it. The decision would mean exposing aspects of her identity and background that she had kept secret since beginning her military service. But the developing situation suggested that the knowledge she possessed might be crucial to preventing something catastrophic. Captain Rodriguez was looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Sergeant, I think we need to continue this conversation with Colonel Harrison. What you're describing sounds like it could be significant, but it's also going to raise questions about your background and clearance status." Maya nodded, understanding that she had just initiated a process that would fundamentally change her relationship with everyone on the base. The secrets encoded in her tattoo were about to be revealed, and with them, a heritage of knowledge and responsibility that stretched back through generations of her family's dedication to understanding and protecting against the cultural forces that shaped global conflicts. As they walked toward Colonel Harrison's office, Maya felt both the weight of revelation and the relief of no longer carrying her secrets alone. The uniform she wore had always been just one layer of her identity, and now the deeper layers were about to be exposed to scrutiny and examination. Whatever happened next, She knew that her quiet existence as just another communications specialist was about to end, replaced by something far more complex and potentially far more significant to the safety and security of everything the people around her had sworn to protect. Colonel Harrison's office felt smaller than usual as Maya stood at attention, watching the base commander's expression shift from routine interest to intense focus. Captain Rodriguez had briefed him on the unusual intelligence patterns and Maya's unexpected contributions to their analysis, but the colonel's questions were probing deeper into territory that Maya had never expected to discuss within the confines of a military installation. Sergeant Chun, the colonel began, settling back in his chair while maintaining direct eye contact. Captain Rodriguez tells me you have access to cultural and historical knowledge that could be relevant to our current intelligence situation. I need you to be completely clear about what you mean by that statement. Maya felt the familiar weight of her hidden tattoo against her shoulder blade, each symbol seeming to press more heavily against her skin as the moment of revelation approached. She had spent months carefully managing her dual identity, presenting herself as a competent but unremarkable communications specialist while carrying knowledge that could illuminate patterns and contexts that escaped traditional intelligence analysis. Sir, my family has maintained certain traditions for many generations, she began, choosing her words with precision. These traditions involve the systematic study and preservation of historical and cultural information related to various regions around the world. The knowledge has been passed down through specific methods that allow for detailed understanding of cultural patterns, historical contexts, and traditional practices that often influence contemporary events. Colonel Harrison leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued by the careful way Maya was describing her background. When you say specific methods, Sergeant, what exactly are you referring to? Are we talking about academic study, family oral traditions, or something else entirely? The question forced Maya to confront the choice she had been avoiding since her arrival at Fort Harrison. She could continue to speak in generalities, maintaining the protective ambiguity that had allowed her to contribute insights without revealing their true source. Or she could trust these men with the full truth of her heritage, including the physical manifestation of knowledge that she carried with her every day. Sir, with your permission, I would like to show you something that will clarify what I mean, Maya replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. But I need to explain that what I'm going to show you has been kept secret from everyone on this base, and its revelation will change my status here significantly. Captain Rodriguez exchanged glances with the colonel, both men recognizing that they were about to cross into territory that existed outside normal military protocols. Colonel Harrison nodded slowly, his expression serious as he gestured for Maya to continue. Maya turned slightly, beginning to unbutton the top portion of her uniform jacket. As she carefully pulled the fabric away from her left shoulder, the edge of her tattoo became visible, intricate lines and symbols that immediately captured both officers' attention. But rather than revealing the entire design, she paused, looking back at the two men. What you're about to see, sir, is not just artistic decoration. Every line, every symbol, every mark represents specific information that has been encoded and preserved through my family's traditional methods. This tattoo contains historical references, cultural interpretations, linguistic patterns, and analytical frameworks that have been accumulated and refined over centuries of study. With deliberate care, Maya pulled her uniform shirt completely away from her shoulder blade, revealing the full extent of the intricate design that covered much of her upper back. The tattoo was extraordinary in its complexity, incorporating symbols and patterns that drew from multiple cultural traditions while maintaining an overall coherence that suggested systematic organization rather than random artistic expression. Colonel Harrison stood up slowly, moving around his desk to examine the tattoo more closely. The design included elements that he recognized from various historical and cultural contexts, but the way they were combined and organized suggested knowledge and understanding that extended far beyond casual academic interest. My God, Sergeant, he said quietly, studying the intricate patterns. How long did it take to create something this complex? The tattooing process took place over several years, sir, Maya replied, remaining still as the colonel examined the markings. But The knowledge it represents has been accumulating through my family for generations. Each symbol encodes specific information that relates to historical events, cultural practices, linguistic patterns, and analytical methods that help in understanding contemporary situations in the regions represented. Captain Rodriguez had also moved closer, his eyes wide as he took in the scope and detail of the tattoo. Sergeant, are you telling us that this tattoo functions as some kind of reference library? That you're carrying encoded intelligence information in your skin? Maya nodded, beginning to relax slightly as she saw that both officers were approaching her revelation with professional curiosity rather than suspicion or alarm. That's essentially correct, sir. The tattoo serves as both a preservation method and a reference tool. The information it contains has been crucial to my ability to interpret the cultural and historical context that appear in the communications we've been monitoring. Colonel Harrison returned to his chair, his mind clearly working through the implications of what Maya had revealed. Sergeant, I need you to walk me through your background more thoroughly. How does someone with this kind of specialized knowledge end up in a standard military communications role? And why wasn't any of this reflected in your security clearance process? The questions touched on the careful balancing act Maya had maintained since deciding to pursue military service. Her family's traditions had always existed parallel to official institutions, providing knowledge and analysis that complemented but didn't necessarily integrate with conventional intelligence operations. When she had chosen to enlist, she had made the conscious decision to present only those aspects of her background that would allow her to serve effectively without revealing the full extent of her capabilities. My family has a long tradition of public service, sir, Maya explained, carefully buttoning her uniform back into place. We've always believed that our knowledge should be used to help protect people and prevent conflicts when possible. Military service seemed like a natural way to contribute, but the specialized nature of our knowledge traditions made it difficult to know how to integrate them with conventional military roles. So you chose to conceal these capabilities rather than risk having them dismissed or misunderstood? Captain Rodriguez asked, beginning to understand the complexity of Maya's situation. Partly that, sir, Maya replied. But also because the knowledge I carry represents generations of accumulated wisdom that my family has carefully protected. Revealing it inappropriately could compromise not just my own effectiveness, but potentially endanger the preservation methods that have allowed this information to survive for centuries. Colonel Harrison was quiet for several moments, processing the extraordinary situation that had just unfolded in his office. A staff sergeant under his command had just revealed that she possessed intelligence capabilities that could significantly enhance their analytical capacity, but through methods and sources that existed entirely outside normal military channels. Sergeant Chun, he said finally, I need you to help me understand the practical implications of what you're telling us. If you have access to cultural and historical knowledge that could help us interpret current intelligence, how do we proceed without compromising either your family's traditions or our own security protocols? The question struck at the heart of the dilemma Maya had been grappling with since recognizing the patterns in the morning's communications. The information encoded in her tattoo could provide crucial insights into the coordinated activities they were monitoring, but sharing those insights would require revealing analytical methods and cultural knowledge that had been carefully protected for generations. Sir, I believe I can provide significant help with the current intelligence situation, Maya replied thoughtfully. The patterns we've been observing align with historical and cultural information contained in my tattoo. I can interpret the cultural references, explain the historical contexts, and help predict likely developments based on traditional patterns of organization and operation. But, the colonel prompted, sensing that there were complications Maya hadn't yet addressed. But, doing so effectively will require revealing more about my knowledge sources and analytical methods, Maya continued. And once that information becomes part of official intelligence channels, it will be difficult to maintain the protective secrecy that has allowed my family to preserve this knowledge effectively. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious as he considered the implications. Sergeant, are you saying that using your knowledge to help with current operations could compromise your family's ability to maintain these traditions in the future? Maya nodded slowly. That's a real possibility, sir. The knowledge I carry has been preserved specifically because it has remained outside official channels. Once it becomes part of government intelligence operations, it will be subject to documentation, analysis, and potential exposure that could fundamentally change how it can be maintained and passed down. The three of them sat in thoughtful silence as the complexity of the situation became clear. Maya possessed knowledge that could prove crucial to understanding and responding to a developing security threat, but accessing that knowledge effectively could compromise traditions that had been maintained for centuries. The decision they made would have implications not just for current operations, but potentially for the long-term preservation of cultural knowledge that existed nowhere else. Colonel Harrison finally broke the silence. "Sergeant, I need to ask you directly. Given these concerns, are you willing to share what you know about the current intelligence situation? Understanding that doing so might have consequences for your family's traditions that we can't fully predict or control." Maya had been anticipating this question since the moment she decided to reveal her tattoo. The choice represented more than just a professional decision about how to contribute to current operations. It was a fundamental choice about how to balance personal heritage with public service, traditional knowledge preservation with contemporary security needs. "Sir, I believe the potential threat we're facing justifies the risk," she replied after a moment of consideration. "The patterns I'm seeing in the communications suggest that something significant and potentially dangerous is being coordinated. If my knowledge can help prevent that, then the risk to my family's traditions is acceptable." Colonel Harrison nodded, recognizing both the gravity of Maya's decision and the trust she was placing in them by sharing information that had been carefully protected for generations. "Very well, Sergeant. I want you to provide whatever insights you can about the current intelligence situation. But I also want to make sure we proceed in a way that respects both the value of your knowledge and the traditions that have preserved it." The colonel reached for his secure phone, preparing to arrange a comprehensive briefing session that would include senior intelligence officers and analytical specialists. But before making the call, he turned back to Maya with one final question. "Sergeant Chun, I need to know, are there others like you? Other people with similar knowledge traditions who might be serving in military or intelligence roles without having revealed their capabilities?" The question touched on aspects of her family's network that Maya had never discussed with anyone outside her immediate relatives. The tradition of preserving and applying cultural knowledge had been maintained by multiple family lines over the generations, and some of those lines had indeed chosen paths that led to service in various official capacities. "Sir, my family's traditions are not unique," she replied carefully. "There are others who carry similar knowledge, and some of them have chosen paths that involve public service in various forms. But the decision to reveal these capabilities is always individual, based on circumstances and the judgment of each person about when the knowledge they carry might be needed." Colonel Harrison absorbed this information, realizing that Maya's revelation might represent not just an individual case of hidden capabilities, but potentially the tip of a much larger network of traditional knowledge that existed parallel to official intelligence operations. As he picked up the secure phone to arrange the expanded briefing session, the colonel found himself contemplating the implications of what he had just learned. For months, he had commanded a base where routine operations proceeded according to established protocols and familiar patterns. Now he was discovering that at least one of his personnel carried knowledge and capabilities that could fundamentally change how they approached intelligence analysis and threat assessment. Maya stood quietly as Colonel Harrison made his calls, feeling both relief and apprehension about what would happen next. The tattoo on her shoulder blade no longer felt like a hidden burden. Instead, it felt like a tool that was finally ready to be used for its intended purpose. But she also knew that everything about her role at Fort Harrison was about to change, and the quiet existence she had maintained as a standard communications specialist was coming to an end. Within minutes, Colonel Harrison had arranged for a classified briefing session that would include the base's senior intelligence officers, analytical specialists, and communications supervisors. Maya would be asked to provide detailed insights about the cultural and historical context surrounding the intelligence they had been gathering, using knowledge that had been preserved and refined through generations of her family's dedication to understanding global patterns and events. As they prepared to leave the colonel's office for the briefing room, Maya felt the weight of responsibility that came with being the bridge between two different worlds of knowledge and analysis. The information encoded in her tattoo was about to become part of official intelligence operations, with all the potential benefits and complications that such integration would bring. The uniform she wore no longer felt like a disguise or a simplification of her identity. Instead, it felt like one layer of a more complex truth that was finally ready to be fully revealed. Whatever happened in the hours and days ahead, Maya knew that the secret she had carried since arriving at Fort Harrison had been transformed into a resource that could help protect the very people and institutions she had sworn to serve. The classified briefing room fell into an absolute silence as Maya finished rolling up her sleeve, revealing the intricate tattoo that covered her left shoulder blade to the assembled group of senior intelligence officers. What had begun as a routine intelligence briefing about unusual communication patterns had transformed into something unprecedented in the history of Fort Harrison. The 12 officers seated around the secure conference table stared at the elaborate design with expressions ranging from amazement to bewilderment. Major Patricia Wells, the base's senior intelligence analyst, leaned forward in her chair, her eyes scanning the complex symbols and patterns that covered Maya's skin. "Sergeant Shun, are you telling us that this tattoo contains actionable intelligence information that relates to the communications we've been monitoring?" Maya nodded, maintaining her military bearing despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. "Yes, ma'am. The symbols and patterns you see represent a systematic encoding of historical events, cultural practices, linguistic patterns, and analytical frameworks that have been accumulated over generations. Much of the information directly relates to the regions and cultural groups involved in the communications we've been tracking." Colonel Harrison gestured toward the large screen at the front of the briefing room, where the morning's intelligence summaries were displayed. "Sergeant, I want you to walk us through what you see in these communications using the knowledge represented in your tattoo. Help us understand what we've been missing." Maya approached the screen, studying the intercepts and analytical summaries that represented hours of conventional intelligence work. To the officers in the room, the communications represented concerning but somewhat puzzling patterns of coordination between groups that had historically operated independently. To Maya, informed by the cultural and historical knowledge encoded in her skin, the patterns told a much clearer and more alarming story. "The coordination we're seeing isn't random or opportunistic," she began, pointing to specific communication timestamps and routing patterns displayed on the screen. "These groups are organizing according to traditional alliance structures that date back centuries. The timing of their communications corresponds to cultural calendar events that have special significance in their traditional belief systems." Lieutenant Colonel James Murphy, who oversaw signals intelligence for the base, interrupted with a question that reflected the skepticism several officers were clearly feeling. "Sergeant, how can you be certain about cultural calendar events and traditional alliance structures? That seems like very specialized knowledge for someone with your official training background." Maya turned to face the group, recognizing that her credibility with these experienced intelligence professionals would depend on demonstrating the depth and accuracy of her knowledge rather than simply asserting its existence. "Sir, the tattoo contains specific reference information about cultural calendars, historical alliance patterns, and traditional organizational structures. If you'll give me access to a detailed map and timeline, I can show you how the communication patterns align with traditional practices in ways that reveal their coordination strategy." Major Wells gestured to her aide, who quickly brought up detailed geographical and temporal analysis tools on the briefing room's computer system. "Show us," she said simply, her tone indicating both curiosity and professional skepticism. Maya moved to the computer terminal, her fingers working with practiced efficiency to overlay historical and cultural reference information onto the intelligence data they had been collecting. As she worked, she began explaining the significance of patterns that had escaped conventional analysis. The groups were monitoring traditionally organized their activities around lunar calendar events that have spiritual significance in their cultural practices, she said, highlighting specific dates on the timeline. "The communication spikes we've been seeing correspond exactly to preparation periods that precede major traditional gatherings. As Maya continued her analysis, the symbols tattooed on her shoulder seemed to come alive with meaning, each mark representing knowledge that illuminated aspects of the intelligence picture that had previously remained unclear. She drew connections between communication routing patterns and traditional trade routes, explained coded references that had puzzled conventional analysts, and identified cultural significance in timing patterns that had appeared random to outside observers. Captain Rodriguez, who had witnessed Maya's initial revelation earlier that day, watched with growing amazement as her analysis transformed their understanding of the situation they were facing. "Sergeant, you're describing coordination for what sounds like a major gathering or operation. What does your knowledge suggest about their ultimate objectives?" Maya paused in her analysis, consulting the mental reference library represented by her tattoo before responding. Based on the traditional patterns they're following, this appears to be preparation for a significant cultural ceremony that requires representatives from multiple groups. However, the security measures and communication protocols they're using suggest that this ceremony has been combined with planning for coordinated action. The implications of Maya's analysis began to sink in as the assembled officers realized they might be observing preparation for something far more significant than conventional intelligence methods had suggested. The coordination they had been tracking wasn't simply tactical cooperation between independent groups. It was the revival of traditional alliance structures for purposes that remained unclear, but were clearly being treated as highly sensitive by the participants. General Elizabeth Carter, who had arrived quietly during Maya's presentation, spoke from the back of the room where she had been observing. "Sergeant Chun, assuming your analysis is accurate, what kind of coordinated action might be associated with this type of traditional ceremony? Are we looking at a cultural celebration, a political demonstration, or something more concerning?" Maya turned to face the general, recognizing that her answer would significantly influence how the military leadership responded to the intelligence they had been gathering. The knowledge encoded in her tattoo included information about historical precedents for similar coordination patterns, and those precedents suggested possibilities that range from peaceful cultural revival to coordinated resistance activities. "Ma'am, the historical patterns suggest several possibilities," Maya replied carefully. "Traditional ceremonies of this scale have been used to legitimize major political decisions, coordinate resistance to external authority, and establish new leadership structures. The security measures being employed suggest they're planning something they expect to be controversial or opposed." General Carter moved closer to the briefing screen, studying the analysis Maya had presented. "Sergeant, I need you to be more specific about potential timelines. If this is building towards some kind of coordinated action, when might we expect it to occur?" Maya consulted the cultural calendar information encoded in her tattoo, cross-referencing it with the communication patterns they had been observing. "Based on traditional timing and the preparation patterns we're seeing, ma'am, I would expect the main ceremony and any associated coordinated action to occur within the next 2 weeks. The lunar calendar's significance and traditional preparation periods all point to a specific window of opportunity." The briefing room buzzed with quiet conversation as officers considered the implications of Maya's analysis. What had begun as monitoring of unusual communication patterns had revealed potential preparation for a significant coordinated action that could have regional or even global implications, depending on the scope of participation and the nature of planned activities. Major Wells returned to her position at the briefing table, her expression serious as she considered the intelligence picture that Maya's analysis had revealed. "Sergeant Chun, I need to understand the limitations of your knowledge. Are there aspects of what we're observing that your family's traditional information can't help us interpret?" The question touched on an important limitation that Maya had been considering throughout her presentation. While her tattoo contained extensive historical and cultural reference information, it represented knowledge that had been accumulated over generations rather than real-time intelligence about current events. There were aspects of the contemporary situation that would require conventional intelligence methods to understand fully. "Ma'am, the knowledge I carry is primarily historical and cultural," Maya replied honestly. "It helps me interpret traditional patterns and understand cultural significance, but it doesn't provide specific information about current leadership, tactical plans, or immediate intentions." We would still need conventional intelligence gathering to understand the operational details of whatever they're planning. Colonel Harrison recognized that Maya's revelation had fundamentally changed their approach to the intelligence situation, but also that her knowledge needed to be integrated with conventional analytical methods rather than replacing them. Sergeant, I want you to work directly with Major Wells and her team to develop a comprehensive analytical picture that combines your cultural insights with our operational intelligence gathering capabilities. As the briefing session continued, Maya found herself answering increasingly detailed questions about the cultural and historical context that informed her analysis. The officers gradually began to understand that the knowledge represented by her tattoo wasn't simply academic information, but a sophisticated analytical framework that had been developed and refined over centuries of careful observation and interpretation. Lieutenant Colonel Murphy, who had initially expressed skepticism about Maya's claims, now found himself asking for detailed explanations of traditional alliance structures and their implications for modern coordination efforts. Sergeant, if these groups are reviving traditional alliance patterns, what does that suggest about their ability to maintain operational security and coordinate complex activities? Maya's response drew on information about traditional organizational methods that was encoded in several sections of her tattoo. Sir, traditional alliance structures were specifically designed to coordinate activities across large geographical areas while maintaining security through cultural rather than technical methods. If they're successfully reviving these patterns, they may be more capable of sustained coordination than conventional analysis would suggest. The implications of this assessment prompted General Carter to request additional intelligence gathering resources and enhanced monitoring of the regions where coordination activities had been observed. Maya's analysis had revealed that they might be facing a more sophisticated and potentially more significant threat than initial assessments had suggested. As the formal briefing session concluded, Maya realized that everything about her role at Fort Harrison had been permanently transformed. The quiet existence she had maintained as a communications specialist was ending, replaced by a position that would require her to serve as a bridge between two different worlds of knowledge and analysis. The tattoo that had been her carefully guarded secret was now an official resource that would inform military intelligence operations. Major Wells approached Maya as the other officers filed out of the briefing room. Sergeant Chun, I want you to know that what you've shared today represents one of the most significant intelligence breakthroughs we've had in years. But I also need you to understand that integrating your knowledge with our operations is going to raise questions and create complications that we haven't fully anticipated. Maya nodded, recognizing that her decision to reveal her family's traditional knowledge would have consequences that extended far beyond the immediate intelligence situation. The information encoded in her tattoo was now part of official military operations, with all the documentation, analysis, and potential exposure that such integration would involve. General Carter remained in the briefing room after the other officers had departed, studying the analytical displays that Maya had created during her presentation. Sergeant Chun, she said without turning around, I need to know whether there are others like you. People with similar knowledge traditions who might be serving in military or intelligence roles without having revealed their capabilities. The question touched on aspects of Maya's family network that she had never expected to discuss in an official capacity. The traditions that had preserved and developed the knowledge represented in her tattoo had been maintained by multiple family lines and allied groups, some of whom had indeed chosen paths that led to service in various official capacities. Ma'am, I can't speak for others or reveal information about family networks without their consent, Maya replied carefully. But I can say that the traditions I represent have always included a commitment to public service when the knowledge we preserve might be needed to protect people or prevent conflicts. General Carter turned to face Maya, her expression serious as she considered the implications of what she was hearing. Sergeant, I'm beginning to understand that what you've revealed today might represent not just an individual case of hidden capabilities, but potentially access to a much broader network of traditional knowledge that could significantly enhance our intelligence operations. As Maya left the briefing room, she felt both relief and apprehension about what would happen next. The weight of secrecy that she had carried for months was gone, replaced by new responsibilities and challenges that she couldn't fully predict. The tattoo on her shoulder blade no longer felt like a hidden burden, but it also no longer belonged exclusively to her and her family's traditions. It had become part of something larger, with consequences that would unfold in ways that neither she nor the officers who now knew her secret could fully anticipate. The uniform she wore as she walked back to her quarters felt different now, no longer a disguise for her true capabilities, but a symbol of service that encompassed the full range of knowledge and skills she brought to her military duties. Whatever happened in the days and weeks ahead, Maya knew that the careful balance she had maintained between her traditional heritage and her military service had been fundamentally altered, creating new possibilities and new risks that would define her future in ways she was only beginning to understand. 3 days after Maya's revelation in the classified briefing room, Fort Harrison had transformed into a hub of unprecedented intelligence activity. The quiet routine that had characterized the base for months was replaced by the urgent energy of a facility confronting a potential crisis that conventional analysis had failed to detect. Maya found herself at the center of operations that extended far beyond anything she had imagined when she first decided to reveal her family's traditional knowledge. The secure communications center where Maya had once processed routine encrypted messages had been expanded into a comprehensive analytical facility. Additional intelligence officers had been brought in from other installations, linguistic specialists had been flown in from academic institutions, and cultural experts from various government agencies were working around the clock to verify and expand upon the insights that Maya's tattoo had provided. Maya stood before a wall-sized display screen that showed real-time intelligence feeds from the regions where coordinated activities had been detected. Her analysis had proven remarkably accurate, with subsequent intelligence gathering confirming the traditional alliance patterns she had identified and revealing the scope of coordination that had been invisible to conventional monitoring methods. Major Wells approached her workstation, carrying a classified folder that contained the latest intelligence assessments. "Sergeant Shun, your predictions about the timing have been confirmed. We're now detecting preparation activities in 7 different regions, all following the traditional patterns you described. The scale of coordination is beyond anything we've seen in recent years." The confirmation of Maya's analysis had elevated her from a staff sergeant in communications to an essential member of a joint task force that included representatives from multiple intelligence agencies and military commands. The knowledge encoded in her tattoo was being systematically documented and cross-referenced with conventional intelligence sources, creating an analytical framework that combined traditional cultural knowledge with modern surveillance and communication monitoring capabilities. General Carter had arrived at Fort Harrison the previous evening, along with a team of senior officers who were coordinating response strategies based on the intelligence picture that Maya's insights had revealed. The general approached Maya's workstation, reviewing the latest analytical displays that showed predicted timelines for the coordinated activities they were monitoring. "Sergeant Shun," the general said, her tone reflecting both appreciation and concern, "your cultural analysis has proven invaluable, but we're now facing questions about how to respond to what we're seeing. The coordination you've identified appears to be leading toward activities that could significantly destabilize the regions involved." Maya looked up from her analysis, recognizing that her role had evolved beyond simply interpreting cultural patterns to providing recommendations about how to respond to the situation her knowledge had revealed. The responsibility was both heavier and more complex than anything she had anticipated when she decided to share her family's traditional knowledge. "Ma'am, the traditional patterns suggest that the coordination we're observing is building toward a formal gathering that will legitimize major political or social changes," Maya replied, consulting the information encoded in her tattoo. Based on historical precedents, attempts to prevent such gatherings often make the underlying issues more volatile rather than resolving them. The assessment reflected one of the most challenging aspects of Maya's situation. The knowledge she possessed didn't just reveal what was happening. It also suggested that conventional responses might be ineffective or even counterproductive. Traditional patterns of organization and alliance had survived for centuries precisely because they were designed to resist external interference and maintain cultural integrity under pressure. Colonel Harrison, who had been coordinating with intelligence agencies throughout the government, joined the conversation with updates that reflected the broader implications of Maya's revelation. Sergeant, we've been sharing your analysis with other agencies, and it's becoming clear that similar coordination patterns are occurring in other regions that weren't initially connected to what we were observing here. The scope of coordination was expanding as Maya's analytical framework was applied to intelligence from other sources and regions. What had initially appeared to be isolated activities were revealing themselves as parts of a much larger pattern of traditional alliance activation that spanned multiple continents and cultural groups. Maya felt the weight of responsibility as she realized that her decision to reveal her family's knowledge had uncovered something far more significant than a regional security concern. The traditional alliance patterns she had identified were apparently being activated on a global scale, suggesting coordination among cultural groups that had maintained connections across vast geographical distances and extended periods of apparent dormancy. Sir, if similar patterns are appearing globally, that suggests we're seeing the activation of traditional networks that have been maintained across multiple generations, Maya said, her analysis drawing on the deepest historical knowledge encoded in her tattoo. These networks were designed to coordinate response to threats that affect multiple cultural groups simultaneously. The implications of this assessment prompted intense discussion among the senior officers about how to interpret the coordination they were observing. If Maya's analysis was correct, the activities they were monitoring might represent not aggressive planning but defensive coordination in response to threats that the traditional networks had identified. Lieutenant Colonel Murphy, who had been working with linguistic specialists to verify Maya's interpretations of coded communications, approached with additional intelligence that supported her broader analysis. Sergeant Chun, we've been able to confirm several of your predictions about communication patterns, but we're also detecting references to external threats that these groups appear to be responding to rather than initiating. The revelation shifted the entire analytical framework that had been guiding their response planning. Instead of preparing to counter coordinated aggressive activities, they were potentially observing defensive coordination among cultural groups that had detected threats through traditional monitoring methods that existed parallel to official intelligence systems. Maya consulted the historical reference information encoded in her tattoo, searching for precedents that might help explain the current situation. The traditional networks include early warning systems that operate through cultural rather than technical channels, she explained to the assembled officers. If these networks are activating globally, it suggests they've detected something that threatens multiple cultural groups simultaneously. General Carter considered Maya's assessment, recognizing that it fundamentally changed how they should approach the situation. Sergeant, if these traditional networks have identified a threat that our conventional intelligence systems haven't detected, we need to understand what they're responding to and whether their concerns align with our security interests. The question prompted Maya to delve deeper into the historical knowledge represented by her tattoo, seeking information about how traditional networks had responded to various types of threats throughout history. The patterns she found suggested that global coordination of this scale typically occurred in response to threats that endangered the cultural integrity and survival of multiple groups simultaneously. Ma'am, based on historical patterns, this level of coordination usually indicates response to threats that could fundamentally alter the cultural and social structures that these groups depend on for survival, Maya replied after careful consideration. The threats could be political, economic, environmental, or technological, but they would need to be significant enough to overcome traditional reluctance to reveal these coordination capabilities. The assessment prompted immediate requests for expanded intelligence gathering focused on identifying potential threats that might have triggered the traditional network activation that Maya had detected. Teams of analysts began examining global political developments, economic trends, environmental changes, and technological developments that might represent the kind of fundamental threat that would prompt such widespread traditional coordination. As the investigation expanded, Maya found herself working with specialists from disciplines she had never encountered in her military service. Anthropologists, historians, linguists, and cultural experts from academic institutions and government agencies were brought in to help verify and expand upon the insights that her family's traditional knowledge provided. Dr. Sarah Martinez, an anthropologist from a major university who specialized in traditional alliance structures, had been brought in to help validate Maya's analysis. Sergeant Chun, the knowledge you're demonstrating represents the kind of systematic cultural preservation that most academic institutions assumed had been lost to modernization. The fact that these traditions have been maintained and are apparently still functional has implications that extend far beyond immediate security concerns. Maya recognized that her revelation was having consequences that reached beyond military intelligence into academic and cultural preservation communities that had been unaware of the continued existence of traditional knowledge networks. The tattoo that represented her family's centuries of careful knowledge preservation was becoming a bridge between worlds that had developed separately for generations. The expanded investigation gradually revealed the threat that had triggered traditional network activation. Climate change, technological disruption, and political instability were combining to threaten the geographical and cultural bases that traditional societies depended on for survival. The coordination Maya had detected represented a global response to threats that conventional analysis had treated as separate issues, but that traditional knowledge systems recognized as interconnected challenges requiring coordinated response. The traditional networks are activating because they recognize that current global changes threaten the fundamental conditions that allow traditional cultures to survive and maintain their knowledge systems. Maya explained to a joint briefing session that included military officers, intelligence analysts, and academic specialists. They're not planning aggression. They're organizing survival strategies for cultural preservation under conditions of unprecedented global. General Carter, who had been coordinating response strategies with multiple government agencies, addressed Maya directly as the scope of the situation became clear. Sergeant Chun, what you've revealed has implications that extend far beyond military intelligence. We're looking at traditional knowledge systems that could provide crucial insights into global challenges that our conventional analytical methods struggle to address effectively. As she stood before the massive analytical displays that now showed global patterns of traditional coordination, Maya reflected on the path that had brought her from a quiet communications specialist to a bridge between two different worlds of knowledge and understanding. Her tattoo, which had begun as a family tradition for preserving cultural knowledge, had become the foundation for a new understanding of how traditional wisdom could contribute to addressing the complex challenges of a rapidly changing world.